Hi everybody, this is your Professor Ian. Welcome to week 5 of English 68, Intro to Mythology. This is my usual Monday video where I talk about what we did last week, talk about what we're doing this week, try to tie things together a little bit. So last week we read the great Theogony by Hesiod. Tons of fun. I love reading it. It is a text you can really get lost in the swirl of names and events. So I'm glad everybody got through it. Lots of great conversations in perusal. Everybody was asking great questions, having great conversations. You know, there was some great stuff about whether Hesiod is misogynist or whether that's, you know, his statements about women are balanced by his statements at the end about the power of the goddesses. Really interesting stuff, and I'm hoping people get into that in their reflection. I think that was the topic this week. So I'm hoping to see more of that. It's, Hesiod is a fascinating and foundational figure, so I'm glad you all got to experience the majesty of the Theogony. One thing to think about when you're reading the Theogony, a lot of people in the perusal discussions were hating on Zeus as well, and hey, I don't blame you. Zeus, even in the Theogony, even in Works and Days at points, it's easy for us as modern readers to think, oh man, Zeus is such a dick. He's doing this, he's doing that, and you can't see why he's, being revered so much. But in Hesiod's writing, if you read the tone of his writing, both Works and Days and Theogony, Zeus is a good guy, right? Zeus is a figure of justice. And, it's really fascinating. It's really fascinating insight, I think, into the ancient Greek mind to think about, how they conceived of justice in this way. Because, Zeus isn't like just giving everybody everything. He's a vengeful person or a vengeful god figure. And, if you cross him, then, you're his enemy, right? But that is seen as justice in the eyes of Hesiod. And remember, I should also note, Hesiod is just one writer representing one tradition. We're going to see a different version of Zeus in Homer. And then, if you read more of the Athenian plays, the later stuff, you'll see a different conception of Zeus. They think about Zeus in a different way. So it's not monolithic, right? The way that the ancient Greeks thought about any of these figures. So this is Hesiod's version of it. It's a very popular version. Like I said, he's a foundational figure, super influential. We have records from ancient Greece that let us know that Hesiod was a well-known poet who won various competitions in different parts of Greece. So, this isn't just something that became famous because we have written records of it. This guy was a famous poet who his version was very well known and very well received. But it is just his version, and it's really interesting to think about how he emphasizes Zeus as the rightful ruler of the universe. That's what the Theogony is essentially all about. It's a tale about how Zeus became the leader, right? Became the ruler, overthrew corrupt leaders before him, took the throne, defeated his enemies, and then went on to found this kingdom, basically. And it talks about his children and his children's children and his people's children, that whole end part where it's all about the lineage of Zeus and lineage of his family, his siblings, and his team, I guess we could call it, right? The Olympian Pantheon. It's all about the lineage of this, and it's very much about it's similar to reading in the Bible when you read about and then Ezekiel begat whoever and begat whoever, right? And it's all about establishing that legitimate lineage, right? So that's very much what's happening in Hesiod towards the end. And, it's good to think about the structure of this poem, right? Because it really does give you an insight into what Hesiod's trying to do. You have this beginning part, the invocation of the muses. Of course, this is a convention of epic poetry, right? This is such an important tale that I need to call upon the muses, the goddesses of inspiration and art and human endeavor. I need to call upon them to let me tell this important tale. It's that grandiose that I need to invoke these muses. And once that's done, he very quickly tells you the story of the beginning of the cosmos, right? Gaia and chaos and everything. And then, Uranos and Kronos, and then quickly into Zeus, right? Hesiod doesn't spend a lot of time with that early part. A certain amount of time, but quickly gets to Zeus, and then it's all about Zeus's upbringing, right? This kind of heroic tale where he eventually overthrows his evil father, and then he has to fight the Titans, he has to fight Typhus, right? And then, so he goes through a number of these big battles like a hero, right? He goes on this kind of hero's journey, defeats his enemies, and is the rightful ruler. What's interesting, too, is the way that Zeus does this is he's not like his predecessors, right? Kronos and Uranos, who are just ruling by force. Zeus, in fact, elicits the help of, his enemies to help him fight. So Zeus is very much like this, he brings together forces, almost diplomatic leader compared to his predecessors. And this is part of what Hesiod is doing too, right? Zeus is different than his predecessors in that he's able to bring together people and get them to fight with him. Even though he's the Lord of the Thunderbolt and everybody's kind of like afraid of him because he's the most powerful, he's also able to bring together people and get them to want to fight on his side, right? So anyways, really fun stuff. A lot of people talk about the names, and yeah, there's a ton of names, but there's also a lot of great imagery. Some of those battle scenes are really, really fun. Aphrodite's birth scene is really fun and something I think everybody should read. It's a lot of fun. There was also some discussion about personification and anthropomorphism, right? Because there are so many names, right? But so many of them are just personifications of abstract things, right? Like dream and sleep. And they're not really fully fleshed out figures. They're not anthropomorphized gods. They're personifications. And there's a fine line between personification and anthropomorphism. They're both in the same kind of realm of figurative language, right? Personification is giving human attributes to inhuman things or abstract ideas, whereas personification is like going further and kind of like humanizing abstract ideas or gods or animals, right? Like Mickey Mouse or something like that. So it's almost like anthropomorphizing is taking it further. Personification is doing that a little bit, giving human attributes to inhuman things, and then anthropomorphism is turning inhuman things into human figures, if that makes sense. Because you get the real difference between Zeus and his siblings in the Olympian pantheon and these other figures, all these names, these personifications of abstract ideas, right? Like I said, even Eros is pretty much just a personification in this poem, just a abstract idea of love of a certain kind. So anyways, interesting conversations. And I just wanted to thank Melita. A lot of people had conversations with her. It's great to have her insights. It's great to have a Greek person with access to the language so readily available. So that's fantastic. I come on to Perusal. I check every day, but then I go in and comment every few days. So it's nice to have a classmate who has such insight too. So that's great. So last week I also asked you to do a flip grid as usual, and talk about what challenged you with this reading, because it's a challenging reading. I'm not going to lie. A lot of people talked about who's speaking, because sometimes you'll read a whole paragraph, you'll be like, who's talking to whom? And you need to go back to the beginning of the paragraph, and that's where Hesiod has established that, and then there's all this other stuff happening. You need to kind of like unpack it a little bit. And so, don't worry about that too much. It's the style of the writing. I have to do that too. If I'm reading through, I'm like, wait, who's talking to who? And I need to go back and unpack it, because, it really does require that kind of attention. And part of that's the writing style, as people talked about. This is an older translation. This is from, I think, 1914, if I remember correctly. So it's an older translation. It's one of my favorites, though. I love the language. It's so grandiose. And I think, I'm not a reader of ancient Greek, but I like the grandiose style. Seems really fitting. I've read more modern ones where they use more crude language and try to simplify it for modern readers, and I don't know. I prefer the grandiose style. I guess I'm more of a Shakespearean reader. But there are some things that people point out. Words like awful, mischievous, heaven. These are some things that people are talking about. Heaven, Uranos, right, should be translated as sky. The Greeks didn't really have a concept of heaven as we would think of it. We'll talk about their ideas about the underworld later on, but they certainly didn't have an idea of heaven as we would think about it. mischievous. Yeah, that seemed a bit weak, that translation. I would love to look at the original Greek. And awful, that's that's the old version of the word awful. We don't use this word anymore. Like full of awe is the original meaning of that word. Creating, inspiring awe in someone. So if you said this God is awful, it's not this God's terrible. 0 out of 10 or something. It's more like this God inspires awe in somebody, and you fall down to your knees because you're filled with awe, right? So there is some, I guess, antiquated diction being used, but again, I think it's I like the style. So, also, Page mentioned the famous painting Birth of Venus, which is in the art gallery in Florence, Italy. I've had a chance to see it too. It's a beautiful painting to see in real life. It's fantastic. And I just wanted to mention this specifically because it is very interesting to look at, the influence of mythology, Greek and Roman, on art, especially Renaissance and some of the older art. That classical art tradition. It's really fascinating. Once you start reading these myths and then you go see these paintings, it's a lot of fun because you can actually unpack the paintings. Before you'd be like, I don't know who these people are. What are they doing? But then you start looking and you're like, oh, that's this figure. And I see this object here. This must represent something. And you can start unpacking these pictures because, these great Renaissance era pictures using mythology are telling stories through painting. And it's really a lot of fun. Once you get into it. So just something to think about. Also last week you wrote a reflection. I'll mark those later this week. That was last week. This week we're talking about the Olympian gods, both Zeus and his siblings and the younger, the offspring. So we're going to use 2 chapters from a textbook that I like. And the reason we're doing this is to give us an overview of all of the gods instead of reading more primary text. This textbook I like. It's very, very in-depth, and they kind of catalog different sources from whence we get information about the different gods. So it's a really good amalgamation of sources. So I hope you appreciate it. We'll look at it in perusal. Next week we'll do a deeper dive into Apollo and Dionysus, and we'll get to read some primary texts about those 2 gods, because they're, I don't want to say the most important gods, but they're 2 really important poles of the Greek pantheon. So we'll look into that. This week I got rid of the reflection. Originally I had a reflection planned, but I took it off the books because it's President Day weekend, so I thought, don't worry about it. Next week we have a reflection, which is a little more involved. It takes a little bit. It just takes a little bit more legwork. So you'll see what I mean. It's not harder or anything. It just takes a little more work. It's hard to explain. It's a project using a different app that you need to present to each other. You'll see. But next week is maybe a little more involved. So I took the reflection away this week, and of course there's a flip grid this week. So just a couple chapters to read and the flip grid, and then you can enjoy your long weekend. Thank you very much. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me. Come by my office hours Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Well, not Friday, not this week, sorry. Wednesday or Thursday. And otherwise, have a great week. Bye-bye.